So just to get us excited about what we're gonna see later. Okay, so to get us excited about what this film is going to give us later, right? We're going to take a look at the website. Okay, so it just shares that this is a scientific deconstruction of evolution. So this is what we were supposed to be expecting. This is supposed to be scientific. All right, so education systems and the media have repeatedly told us that humans and all living creatures evolved from a single-celled organism through random copying errors in the DNA called mutations. I'll just say that that's an interesting way to talk about evolution. A little bit of poisoning the well already, we can kind of see. And it says that there is a reproductive filter of natural selection. It's more complicated than that, but okay. This allegedly occurred over billions of years through unguided natural processes. Furthermore, we are told that the fossil record leaves no doubt that mankind evolved from ape-like creatures. Well, humans are apes. If we don't want to forget that, we are. Okay. Okay. It says famous atheists. We're going to move forward. Famous atheists like Richard Dawkins and Bill Nye tell us that we need to face the facts. We are nothing more than organized assemblages of biomolecules, and there's no ultimate basis for morality, no ultimate meaning of life, no free will, and no life after death. Humans have no soul, and we will never stand before God to give an account for our lives. Which, fair. I mean, I definitely would believe that. I definitely would believe that. All right. And it's also like, I guess, supposed to be depressing when you look at this. You're supposed to be sad when you hear this stuff. But you know, as Dawkins says, DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is. And we dance to its music. But if the story we've been told about our alleged evolutionary ancestry is wrong, and the latest findings from modern genetics effectively falsify it, would you believe it? I don't know if I read that right, but that was confusing. Basically, it says, can we verify the claims? And it says creationists are often accused of not being real scientists, even if some of us were former atheists who were research scientists at major universities like Cornell or received PhDs from Harvard in biology. Aware of this bias against creationists, we went out of our way to cite almost exclusively from mainstream, peer-reviewed scientific sources. Including the prestigious journal Nature, Science, Proceedings of the National Academy of the Sciences, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so basically, it's going to say that all of the claims here have been peer reviewed. And to my understanding, when I have kind of looked into this a little bit deeper, is that sometimes peer review also can be accurate, but the level of, robustness, that's not really a professional way to say that, of, the robustness of this kind of definitely depends on who are the peers. I guess I'll put it that way. So we'll start here. So virtually all examples of beneficial mutations are caused by loss of function adaptations or loss of regulation, which doesn't make any sense. The accumulation of unselectable harmful mutations results in irreversible genetic damage. Okay, sorry. This is literally basically saying that molecules harm and they don't help. Let's just kind of start on that. Okay. I'm just gonna put this up here. You can pause this later if you want to take a look at it more deeply. And they do have a page of references. I will kind of just let you guys scan this really quick. And then basically it says, we just want people to hear both sides. These are very equal equally scientific ideas, equally scientific, 100% equal. Um, but that's it's just crazy. I mean, there shouldn't be multiple interpretations of scientific data. Scientific data is just data. Uh, Maybe that's a lie. Actually, yeah, I think it might be honest to say that people can interpret the same data differently if you look at it from different lenses or if you kind of filter for different things. But the idea that there is some type of a secular science and a biblical science, I feel like that idea isn't a great one. Isn't my favorite, I'd say. Basically, it says that those atheist meanies, keep telling us that this is what we have to do. That we have to believe in evolution. That's depressing. Okay? Someone says evolution has holes. We're actually going to explore some of these holes directly, okay? Explore these holes deeply, right? All of the holes. Interdisciplinary studies, that's a great point. Definitely would help with this part here. So they're talking about, they want to reach souls with this film. See, Allie, you get what I'm saying. All right. So that's this. Like I said, this one has, I'll move it out a little bit. They have the resources here. So this is kind of what we can look into. If you are if you are a layperson, just like me, right? I'm not a scientist in this way. Okay. You want to say, who made this documentary? Who made this? Do they have a mission? They want people to believe. They want souls to be reached with this message. Okay. There seems to be some spiritual values that are expressed there. Okay. This is the process. We take things slowly. We try our best to understand. I love that idea. Spelunking creationism. Perfect. That's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing here. So we're looking here. I remember this idea of entropy being one that my dad talked to me about a lot about when I was younger, that like things always move towards disorder and not towards order, right? So evolution never makes sense. This was a good question. Define former atheist. I think that's always interesting. I've sometimes I look at myself and I wonder, am I the same as the Christians who say, "Oh, well, you were never a real Christian"? Anyway. And Jess, I'm sure that we do trust scientists in a dogmatic way. I'm sure that we do in some ways. I'm sure there are many areas of life where we are not considering all of the different possibilities, or that scientists get very excited about things sometimes and they make assumptions where they shouldn't. And sometimes in the way that you write things, it can change opinions as well. All right. So we're talking about here, right? Genetic entropy, the idea that things always move towards disorder. These are the ideas that we're talking about. Contested bones. Is Lucy really real? Right? Seems that that's the book there. Is this another idea of evolution? Maybe. So this is kind of, yeah, this is who is making this documentary. Okay, this is what they are kind of giving you as resources to take a look at if you want to learn more about creationism and the technical papers that they have and things like that. Let's see how interested you guys are. Maybe we can go deeper. But now we're going to dive in to the documentary itself.
Have you ever looked up at the night sky and wondered how the vast expanse of the universe, with its countless stars and galaxies, came into existence? How do you explain the incredible diversity of plants and animals that fill our habitable planet? How old is the Earth? And how can we know for sure? And how do you explain the origin of mankind and the beautifully diverse ethnic groups?
One thing that I want us to kind of like pay attention to also while we're watching this is when we're talking about propaganda films, everything's intentional. Okay. So all the scenes, all the cuts, like music, all that stuff is kind of meant to send a specific type of message. Even the types of questions that they're going to be answering most likely are meant to kind of put a specific narrative out.
Put simply, where did everything come from?
For centuries, we have struggled to understand where we came from. Many theories have been proposed, some rational and thought-provoking, others wildly speculative and seemingly impossible to verify. So,
I wonder which is which in their mind.
how do we sort through all of these theories to determine which one is most logical? Modern science is revealing important clues to this puzzle, helping us to better understand the full picture of our origin. However, the mystery still remains. Where did everything come from?
The standard answer offered is the Big Bang explanation for the origin of the universe, and the evolutionary theory for the origin of the species. This means whether it was the...
Which that's actually pretty accurate. A lot of times you'll get people just kind of blending those things together. But this time, you know, that's good.
Formation of the universe, the first life forms, or people, the answer is the same. It was all the result of blind natural processes acting on matter and energy over many millions and even billions of years. As stated by National Geographic magazine, it all began in chaos. In other words, the universe and everything in it, including you and me, are nothing more than the sum total of a series of natural accidents.
What? Look at all of this beauty. How could all of this beauty be caused by an accident? Also, the other thing that's important to understand is language and perspective. We are humans, right? We're human beings. It is incredibly, I guess, I don't know, proud for us to say that these are accidents from our perspective, for sure. Even a car accident, in our perspective, we kind of consider an accident. But when it's, for example, if your tire had been, punctured a mile back and exactly at, point whatever minutes later, your tire was going to blow or I'm making this up. Is that an accident? For us, yeah, from our perspective, for sure. But according to how, like, determinism, things just happen the way they were. If there's a rotting tree and one day your car happens to be parked underneath it, I don't think that's your fault, right? That's an accident from your perspective. But on the global, not the global, but the more for nature, not so much.
For the Big Bang Theory, the universe formed through accidental collisions of atomic particles. For biological evolution, the species formed through accidental copying errors in the DNA called mutations. This is the story we've all been told. But what if the standard answer is not as convincing as we may have been led to believe? What if there are fundamental problems with the Big Bang and the evolutionary theory that scientists are well aware of, but have not been made known to the general public?
Uh-oh, sneaky, sneaky scientists. Oh no. Okay, that's strike one for the scientists. All right. Also, let's not clown on mutations like that. Let's not pretend that mutations, while sometimes, yeah, we think about mutations being someone having an
In
extra
the last decade,
or something which isn't very useful, but it can also mean, some type of a change in the formation of, a hip structure, loss of hair or something like that. Those might be beneficial.
alone, compelling new evidences from the major fields of science have cast serious doubt on the evolutionary view of natural history. Discoveries so profound, if made known to the world, would have the power to drastically change our understanding of the past. Might the biblical view of origins as described in the book of Genesis offer a more reasonable explanation? To some, it is extremely naive to even consider the Genesis account of creation on the grounds that it is believed to be nothing more than a primitive myth. And
so if I'm going to be pretending like coming from the perspective of, maybe someone who's curious about both perspectives, I'm like, yeah, maybe we wouldn't be fair to both sides. Let's hear out both perspectives. Right? It's just so hard to consider the Bible as science. But we'll get there.
Therefore, totally incompatible with modern science. This stems from the widely held perception that creation is religion and evolution is science. But is this really true?
I guess I want to think about where else does creation come from? Okay.
Is it proper to equate evolution with science? Does science have the ability to address questions regarding past events that we were not there to directly observe or verify? Events like the spontaneous origin of the universe, the origin of life from non-life, and the evolution of the earliest life forms into mammals. Or might we be giving science a power it does not have? To answer this, it is important that we accurately define science as well as its limitations. When we think of scientists in white lab coats analyzing cells under a microscope, or chemists mixing acids and bases, it is known as observational science. This is the type of science that led to finding cures for diseases and our advanced technology, computers, smartphones, orbiting satellites, and Mars rover robots.
Interesting. We might be moving into some type of evolution as just guesses type of thing. Let's see.
A good definition of observational science can be found in standard introductory level biology textbooks, which state, "Scientific inquiry is a powerful way to know nature, but there are limitations to the kinds of questions it can answer. These limits are set by science's requirements that hypotheses be testable and falsifiable, and that observations and experimental results be repeatable." Notice observational science has definable limitations to the kinds of questions it can answer. Hypotheses must be based on observations and experimentation. In addition, hypotheses must be testable and their results repeatable. Observable, testable, and repeatable experimentation are the hallmarks of good observational science.
Okay.
When biologists grow bacteria on a nutrient medium to study adaptations, growth rate changes, or sequence their DNA to determine which genes suffered mutations. They are practicing good,
Once again, listen to that. Suffer mutations.
Observational science. But answering the question of where bacteria came from to begin with, their origin, is outside the bounds of observational science.
Science.
So this seems to be communicating, basically, if we don't have an answer for where this started, we don't have an answer for anything at all. This is a documentary that's called Dismantled. So if you want to find it, Dismantled documentary, you should be able to find it. So mods in the chat, you can always let people know that.
This really is about the study of the operation of the present world. And a lot of people think that, well, no, some science, you study the past. Well, not really. I mean, when you dig up a fossil, people say, see, there you go. You're looking at the past.
Let's go back. Dr. Jason Lyle is an astrophysicist, which is great. Great for Dr. Lyle. Okay. What might he know about biology, though? What about his expertise in biology? Interesting.
Well, not really. I mean, when you dig up a fossil, people say, see, there you go. You're looking at the past. Well, no, you're looking at the present. Fossils exist in the present. And that's not to say we can't make some guesses about the past based on some of the scientific evidence we see in the present. But our worldview, our way of thinking, our view of history will obviously influence any reconstructed past.
I would say that okay. Oopsie. When we blend the truth with some mixy truthy stuff, this becomes a lot harder to weed through, right? Yeah, we're gonna definitely use a modern interpretation. I feel like we have biases. That is a problem thing. And I just was thinking about that, kind of like looking at different layers of like ice cores and other types of things. We can look in the past. We can look in the past by taking a look at those different layers. We can see almost an image of what the atmosphere was like. We can get a narrow image of something. So yes, that fossil is in the present, but it is a image of what life was like in the past. Let's think about Pompeii, right? That was almost like a town frozen in time or something like that. Of course, we're looking at it from modern perspective, but a lot of the people were right there, huddled together, as this was occurring.
Same goes with stars and galaxies. People say, you look at galaxy, you're looking back in time. Well, I'm looking at the galaxy today, right? The photons are hitting my eyes today. And so astronomy really takes place in the present. And granted, we can speculate about how galaxies looked, 1,000 years ago, or what stars looked like thousands of years ago. But the fact is, those kind of claims are not scientifically testable. The kind of science that makes computers work and puts people on the moon, real science, observational science, is testable and repeatable in the present. It doesn't take place in the past, it takes place now.
According to Big Bang cosmologists, the universe began 13.7 billion years ago. The Earth is said to have formed 4.5 billion years ago. The first fish evolved 530 million years ago. Dinosaurs.
Yeah, let's pause. Let's pause to remember how the astrophysicist is denying how science works and how how literally light travels, which is interesting. Which is interesting, which is a choice. It's a choice. Okay.
evolved 230 million years ago. Mammals 120 million years ago.
Wait, Blue made a great point. Yep, this is excellent. This is an excellent film. Great stuff, great visuals. Like I said, there is truth in this documentary. No, this is a real documentary. I wish this was a mockumentary.
The earliest primates 50 million years ago, and Homo sapiens evolved from hominins roughly 200,000 years ago.
Very ominous music.
Realize the most significant evolutionary events all allegedly occurred in the unobservable, unrepeatable, untestable, and therefore unverifiable past. Almost the entire evolutionary theory, including the Big Bang, is outside the realm of observational science. All of the aforementioned past events, and many more not mentioned, are unamenable to the scientific process. No man was there as an eyewitness to provide for us first-hand knowledge of what actually took place. Thus, evolution is more appropriately a history.
No. So they have completely just kind of they have yeah, someone just says, oh yeah, and now the Bible is debunked, essentially, right? It's funny, yeah, if we kind of take the same logic as the Bible, right, we could kind of debunk the Bible in that way as well. It's just history. It can't be real, a real presentation of reality. Interesting. But evolution can be proven right now, right? Evolution and the way it functions, we can see it today. Yes, our human evolution we can't see, but we can see evolution now in other species. And then we can also look back and kind of be able to tell what happened from those former snapshots, like from Pompeii. We can look at it. And like you said, history can use some scientific things, I think, in it. We can make guesses about some things, but it's not, obviously history is not a science by any means. But yeah, we can use scientific information to craft information about our history. I don't think that makes science or evolution a history.
Ernst Mayr is hailed by the scientific community as the Darwin of the 20th century. As a distinguished evolutionary biologist, Mayr was more than qualified to make the following admission: that evolution is a history, not an observational science. He affirmed this, saying, "Evolutionary biology, in contrast with physics and chemistry, is an historical science. The evolutionist attempts to explain events and processes that have already taken place. Laws and experiments are inappropriate techniques for the explication of such events and processes. Instead, one constructs a historical narrative, consisting of a tentative reconstruction of the particular scenario that led to the events one is trying to explain."
And as a layperson consuming this information, you'd just be like, okay, that sounds about right. This guy didn't even believe that his science was real.
Here, Mayr did not place evolutionary biology on equal planes with physics and chemistry, which are clear examples of observational science. Instead, he describes evolution as a historical science, a very inexact type of inquiry, the tentative reconstruction, meaning it is subject to change whenever the theorizer feels it is necessary to better fit the evidence. When evolutionary scientists attempt to explain what they think happened in the past, they first presuppose that the evolutionary view of history is correct. This view of history then serves as a framework from which all evidence and data are interpreted. Mayr described this presupposed view of history as a narrative, literally a story written by scientists based on what they believe happened in the unverifiable past. The biblical view of origins, as described in the early chapters of Genesis, chapters 1 to 11.
I'm very curious as to how they're going to just show that the Bible is something other than this, other than history. It's a very interesting, Anna brought this up earlier, like how if evolution is history from their perspective, the Bible is definitely history then.
11 is also considered a historical narrative. The Genesis account of creation is not written in a style typical of Hebrew mythology or poetry. Instead, it is recorded as a sober historical account with precise chronological reference points, carefully detailing major origins-related events, including the recent creation of the heavens and earth, the first male and female, a global flood, and the formation of the various people groups and languages. The implications of this are profound. Rather than an issue of science versus faith, the creation-evolution controversy ultimately boils down to a face-off between two opposing histories.
That's interesting. Look at that. Okay, so I guess that was what I was kind of saying. I was wondering how they were going to make this any different, but now they're saying actually evolution and creationism are on the same playing field. Man, so many yawns today.
The major difference is that the evolutionary view of history was narrated by scientists within the last 150 years and is tentative to reconstruction, whereas the biblical view of history was recorded thousands of years ago and is not subject to continual revision.
That's a constant thing about Christians that is wooed up, right? The Bible is the same, science always changes. That's seen as a negative thing. But I appreciate that science can change and that science, shifts itself when it needs to.
Some might object to accepting the origins issue as a battle between two different histories and insist it actually comes down to a matter of evidence. You may think, do we really need to presuppose a certain view of history in order to accurately address the question of origins? Wouldn't it be better to just let the evidence speak for itself? While this may sound like the most objective way to approach the origins issue, it is based upon a fundamental misconception about the nature of evidence, called the evidence scale fallacy.
This is very interesting. I think that they're about to tell us why it's a bad idea to look at the evidence and construct a narrative based off of the evidence, which, okay.
A lot of people have the impression that the way that you resolve the origins debate is that you try to accumulate the most evidence, as if there's a scale and, the evolutionists have some evidence and the creationists, we think we have more evidence, and so the scale weighs in our favor. The fact is we all have exactly the same evidence. I have access to the same fossils and DNA patterns as my secular colleagues. I look at the same stars and galaxies that they do. We have the same evidence. It's just a question of how do we interpret that evidence? What does the evidence mean?
Okay, so this is an interesting way to do it. Like, sure, you can interpret the evidence in a bunch of different ways, I guess. But this is also why we talk about scientific consensus and like peer review among, a broad, number of your peers with different perspectives and stuff like that. And, if one person, for example, says that, hey, the math that you did on this particular project didn't work out so well, and then you're like, well, tough nuts, then I don't know if you are willing to put your work up for peer review.
Conclusions do we draw from it? And that will be influenced by our worldview, our way of thinking, our belief system. Evidence by itself doesn't really mean anything. We have to interpret evidence. And so if you come to a rock, you can't just say, well, I'm just going to look at the rock and that'll objectively tell me how the rock got there and so on. No, we have a view of history, and our view of history will tell us something about the past. We can certainly use evidence in the present and try to reconstruct past events, but obviously our view of history is going to have a very profound influence on that. You can't escape that. We all have a view of history. We all have some understanding of how the universe came to be, and that will influence necessarily our understanding of the evidence.
I don't know. It is this is also giving, hey, we're kind of tattletaling on ourselves on how much we kind of base our biases off of what we believe about the world. But, we'll see if they convince me otherwise.
Take, for example, the Grand Canyon. Both creationists and evolutionists have access to the same geological features. In an attempt to explain how the canyon formed, evolutionary geologists have traditionally interpreted it as having formed over millions of years through slow and gradual processes.
Once again, we're going to have an evolutionary geologist versus a Christian geologist. I don't think that's how science is supposed to work. That's kind of the whole thing.
Processes based on the evolutionary view of history, namely the geologic timescale and uniformitarian assumptions. Geologists who accept the account of Noah's flood described in Genesis interpret the same evidence differently and describe its formation through catastrophic processes that occurred rapidly and relatively recently. This simple example describes the true nature of the origins issue. Notice both creationists and evolutionists are interpreting the same evidence and coming to opposite conclusions.
Which kind of says something, right? Maybe one of you is not correct, right? If we look at the evidence for like the flood, the global flood, and we think about, for example, if we're talking about all of that water moving, we're not looking at something like the Grand Canyon. We're looking at like eviscerating the planet. Our shores would look like so much water spent a year coming back from the mountains and everywhere, flooding into the seas, and we don't see that. Come on,
This is due to the evidence being interpreted through two very different views of history. This raises an important question. If it all comes down to an interpretation of the evidence, how do we know which interpretation is correct?
question.
To answer this, we need to visit the Adirondack Mountains of New York State, where a large boulder rests alone on the 25.
Really? Why don't we just use math? What, you know what I'm saying? Like, why don't we look at let's see why we look at the rock.
500-foot peak of Mount Azure. The mystery of how the boulder made its way to the top of the mountain occurred in the unobservable past. It is a historical science. No one alive today was there to verify through first-hand knowledge what actually took place. For this reason, this serves as an appropriate analogy for properly understanding the creation-evolution controversy.
Let's say a loose analogy.
For the sake of simplicity, let's assume there are only two possible interpretations for how the boulder arrived at the peak of Mount Azure. The first interpretation is that Jane is abnormally strong and managed to push the 20-ton boulder to the top of the mountain all by herself. The second interpretation is that the boulder was transported by glacial ice over the top of the mountain. When the glacier melted, it left the boulder behind and is known as an erratic in geology. Now, which interpretation is correct? Without hesitation, you would immediately conclude the second interpretation is the right answer. But why was that such an easy decision to make? The answer is simple. The glacier interpretation is most consistent with the evidence from observational science, making it the far more reasonable.
Okay, so this is a good idea, right? It's a good idea that things that make sense, kind of if it's consistent with what we typically see, that one's correct. but that's not always right, right? Science isn't always okay. I'll say it this way. Science is counterintuitive sometimes. And also, they're kind of presenting this false dichotomy situation at the same time, but we don't even need to go there.
Reasonable explanation. The same level of clarity is possible when investigating the topic of creation and evolution.
Throughout this documentary, we will be examining key evidence from the major fields of science, including biology, paleoanthropology, and genetics. As we carefully examine the shared evidence, a key question to consider is which view of history, the biblical view or the evolutionary view, allows for an interpretation that is most consistent with observational science.
Which is like nuts, because not the Bible.
Evolution is often referred to as a very slow process occurring over many millions of years. For this reason, evolutionary scientists openly acknowledge that large-scale changes, known as macroevolution, cannot be directly observed. Naturally, this leads to the question, if it is not observable, then on what grounds can anyone claim evolution is a scientific fact?
For the same reason that we can prove how stalactites and stalagmites form. It's crazy because they pick and choose their theories very, very cleverly. Because we can, for example, we can watch a formation of like this much of a stalagmite in like 10 years or something like that, maybe even smaller. But from that, we can then connect that clearly this is how this stalactite, so I forget which one is which, whatever, stalactite, stalagmite formed was from this mineral, mineral dropping through the water, etc.
The typical response is to claim that although we have never seen macroevolution, we can see evolution happening today on a small scale, known as microevolution. Microevolution involves tiny genetic modifications that result in superficial changes in an organism, such as an increase in a bird's beak size. These type of minor changes help the organism adapt to a slightly different environment. No one denies that this type of adaptive fine-tuning occurs through mutations and natural selection. However, proponents of evolution believe that given enough time, the small observable changes seen in microevolution will inevitably add up to large-scale changes known as macroevolution. This is the micro equals macro fallacy.
That is not a real fallacy. Micro equals macro fallacy. That is brand new.
Which assumes macroevolution is essentially microevolution extrapolated.
It is. There's not going to be any proof here as to say, at least so far, I've not seen any proof to say why it's not.
Over long periods of time without limit. This is an example of unbounded extrapolation, which is known to be extremely poor science.
Although,
do you see? The normal layperson who doesn't know this stuff is like, wow, okay, yeah, this is really bad science. I don't want to do bad science.
in theory, both types of changes involve the same underlying genetic processes like recombination, mutation, selection, genetic drift, and gene flow, there's a profound and essential difference between macro and microevolution that is often overlooked. Macroevolution requires vast amounts of additional genetic information, meaning the formation of many new functional DNA sequences, while microevolution does not.
According to evolutionary theory, all living creatures evolved from a single ancestral life form that lived billions of years ago. A microorganism believed to be similar to that of modern bacteria. As the first living organism to emerge from the primordial sea, it would have had minimal genetic information just enough to carry out the essential life functions. A reasonable estimate for the amount of DNA contained in a hypothetical primitive bacterium would be less than 500,000 genetic letters, equivalent to about 2 500-page books of typewritten information. This may sound impressive, but not compared to humans with 3.2 billion DNA letters in a single cell, the equivalent of approximately 1,500-page books. Thus, in order for an ancestral microbial species to evolve into man, a mind-boggling amount of new functional DNA sequences would have to build up over time. This new genetic information would be essential in order to specify new functions and structures such as eyes, ears.
Okay, so we're gonna probably in a little bit do the mutations can't make new information situation. We'll see if that actually happens, though. This is pretty predictable so far.
Brain, heart, lungs, and a multitude of other biological features found in higher life forms. The genetic specifications for even a single type of higher life form represent a large library of information. Yet there are millions of life forms: plants, sea creatures, birds, reptiles, and mammals, each with their own library of genetic instructions.
Evolutionists claim these new genetic specifications can arise through random mutations and the reproductive filter of natural selection. Textbooks offer a number of examples that are claimed to be direct evidence of evolution in action. Let's look carefully at a couple popular examples to see whether they involve the addition of new functional DNA sequences in order for macroevolution to be possible.
That's what I thought we were going to see.
Consider the observable changes occurring within canines. Wolves, coyotes, jackals, dingoes, and the numerous varieties of domesticated dog are all believed to have descended from an ancestral wolf species. In textbooks, the development of the various dog breeds is cited as a demonstrable example of evolution on a small scale.
Okay.
McGraw-Hill's widely used biology textbook states this type of change will inevitably lead to large-scale evolution over time. In making this claim, the textbook authors are committing the micro equals macro fallacy, the blunder of employing unbounded extrapolation. The superficial differences seen in the various dog breeds are not caused by the formation of new functional DNA sequences that are required for macroevolution. Instead, the differences are caused by degenerative mutations in a small number of already existing genes. Mutations in these genes are responsible for the variation in traits like coat color, face shape, and foreshortened limbs. But such mutations are limited in the extent of change that they can produce before they disrupt the necessary function of those genes. Factor in the well-understood process of genetic recombination, the reshuffling of pre-existing genetic information, and the formation of the many dog breeds is easily explained. Although mutations have provided an additional source of variation for breeders to select from, this is not the type of change that macroevolution requires, since
there is no reason why it's not. 100%. If this camera doesn't stop. Okay.
it has not resulted in any new genes or new genetic information. In fact, producing dog breeds through artificial selection results in an overall loss of genetic information. The non-desirable traits that are not selected are literally bred out of the gene pool. This explains why it is possible to breed wolves and select for certain traits over a number of generations to produce chihuahuas. But you can never breed chihuahuas to get back to wolves. The DNA information necessary to get back to a wolf has been lost.
So everyone knows.
Such an interesting way to put it. Like, I don't think they're wrong. You know, I don't think they're incorrect. We're gonna try something different with this camera, guys, because it's having a tough day. Yeah, I don't think that's incorrect, right? We might not see another wolf thing coming back from, yeah, we might not see another wolf coming back from a chihuahua, right? If that means that evolution is fake, then goodness gracious, that's a low bar, right? The chihuahua doesn't mean that information is lost, right? Because we have a, like, for example, how we've gone from dinosaurs down to things like chickens and other birds, right? Have they like, are they now, I guess they try to make it seem like losing information is somehow worse and you can't go get better again by being a wolf.
Knows that within the dog kind, we have lots of different breeds of dogs. And some people might say, well, if we can see all these different breeds of dogs, long ears, short ears, long fur, short fur, certainly that's an example of new genetic information that's being added to have those traits. But when we observe this at the genetic level, that is not what we see. We're just seeing variation on traits that those organisms already had. The genes that code for fur in a dog, okay, they'll produce fur, long, short, different colors, things like that, but they're never going to become wings, okay? They're never going to become feathers. They're not going to change like that because they don't have that information to be able to do that. And there's simply no genetic mechanism that allows you to add the information that you need for evolution to occur. All you see is variation within the traits that they already have.
Which is exactly the mechanism by which evolution functions. It's so fascinating. They essentially kind of tell you how evolution works, and then they tell you that that's not evolution. This is so deceptive in a very
The
sneaky
modern
way.
theory of evolution is founded on the concept that beneficial mutations are the raw material for eventually building new sets of genetic instructions. One of the most popularly cited examples of beneficial mutation is the development of bacterial resistance to antibiotics. Standard biology textbooks claim it is direct evidence for evolution. But is true evolution really taking place here?
It's literally, this documentary is, here, look at some examples of actual evolution, and let's kind of pretend why it's not good enough, kind of.
Certain classes of antibiotics are considered prodrugs, which means they do not pose a threat to the bacteria until they are activated into their reactive or lethal form through the assistance of enzymes naturally produced by the bacteria. However, random mutations in the bacterium have been shown to disable the function of the required enzyme, preventing the antibiotic from converting into its lethal form, resulting in resistant bacteria. Although these mutations may be considered beneficial, since the bacteria are now able to survive the antibiotic treatments, the genetic information that encodes an otherwise useful enzyme was lost. This is the opposite direction required for macroevolution.
That is just not true. What they keep saying, oh no, the information is lost. Oh no, that's a bad thing. I guess, once again, it all depends on the perspective. From our perspective, oh no, yeah, they lost something useful to us, but they gained something useful to them.
In the long run,
Weird.
These types of loss of function mutations are counterproductive to macroevolution. For this reason, bacterial resistance to antibiotics cannot be considered direct evidence for evolution.
One of the ways in which bacteria become resistant to antibiotics is through something called horizontal gene transfer. And this is something that is pretty unique to bacteria. Humans don't do it, animals don't do it. But what happens is that bacteria can essentially swap genetic information. So genetic information can be transferred, like an antibiotic resistant gene, from one organism to another. But simply transferring genetic information is not what evolution needs. Just transferring it from one organism to another organism, and they're both bacteria, doesn't essentially change the essence of that bacteria. So that's still not the type of genetic change that we need to go from one.
Also, guys, this documentary could have been so much shorter than it is. I might start skipping some of this stuff just because she's repeating herself.
For evolution to create higher life forms from lower life forms, there must be a very large increase in total genetic information. Additional genetic information is needed to encode the complex biological capabilities that characterize higher life forms. Any hypothetical large-scale evolutionary change would require vast amounts of new functional DNA sequences, which would have to arise through beneficial mutations filtered by natural selection. Although adaptive changes can occur,
so interesting that they say stuff like filtered through natural selection. Like natural selection needs to pick these things. It wants natural selection, it wants evolution to be a god so badly. But unfortunately, it just isn't. It just isn't one.
Through rare beneficial mutations, it is consistently at the expense of destroying DNA information, as seen with bacterial resistance to antibiotics.
There are many mutations that are advantageous. In that sense, they're beneficial in that they help adaptation to a certain circumstance. But when they actually look at what happened,
no, I can't speed it up to 1.5. I can't. Oh, wait, can I? Let's do 1.25.
The mutation almost always involves loss of function. Something's broken, a protein isn't functioning properly. So there's a disease called sickle cell anemia. The red blood cells of people with sickle cell anemia are misshapen. Instead of being a lozenge-like cell, they're shaped like a crescent moon or a sickle. And those deformed red blood cells can't carry as much oxygen as they should, and they're prone to causing blood clotting. Well, how is that beneficial? If you have this terrible disease, you're not as susceptible to the malarial parasite. So in certain areas where malaria causes lots and lots of deaths, you're basically trading one pathology for another. And so better to have sickle cell anemia, where you're sick but not dead, than to get malaria and die. So it's a very bizarre idea that sickle cell anemia is a beneficial trait. They use it because there's so few examples, convincing examples of beneficial mutation.
That is so crazy. I guess they don't even want to talk about things like mosquitoes being able to survive pesticides, different birds very quickly being able to have beak size to be able to hunt for different types of food. Very bizarre. And yeah, sickle cell is really frustrating, you know. Having it is terrible for the people who have it. It can like the cells can like wear away at your bones and all of those things. It's awful. But yeah, it does have that one type of benefit. And I guess there are just so many other examples of other types of mutations that are beneficial. And also beneficial is very subjective. Once again, committing this sin, committing the fallacy of anthropomorphizing or anthropocentrism, centrizing, I guess, the world and science.
The information eroding nature of beneficial mutations makes sense when we think about what mutations really are. They are literally random copying errors in the DNA. Think of them as genetic typographical errors. By their very nature, they disrupt cellular processes, such as gene regulation and enzyme function, by scrambling the organism's genetic instruction manual. They do not create information, they erode information bit by bit. This type of genetic change occurring over deep time will...
Once again, guys, it's all about language here. This language is so sneaky and deceptive. I feel like the best thing to say is mutations are about changes, you know?
never result in genome-building evolution. It is going in the wrong direction informationally. Thus, the common argument that given enough time, a series of small changes, microevolution, will eventually add up to large-scale changes, macroevolution, is a fallacy.
They still have not.
The rarity of beneficial mutations complicates.
They definitely have not given enough reasons to say this yet. Hold on. My audio should be there, but my video is taking a break.
Things further. It is widely acknowledged in the genetics community that harmful mutations vastly outnumber beneficial mutations. These destructive mutations are eroding the information content of the genome at a much faster rate than rare beneficial mutations could build it.
So if you have bad mutations, even if just a fraction of them are accumulating, if the deleterious mutations are accumulating even at a very slow rate, and you have very few beneficials to counteract that, you're going downhill. The fact that beneficial mutations are very rare, and that most mutations are, if they're not neutral, they're deleterious, is one of the best attested facts of biology.
In addition, most of these harmful mutations cause very subtle biological effects. They are called slightly harmful or nearly neutral mutations because their effect is too subtle to be affected by natural selection. This means natural selection can do nothing to remove them from the population. They are below what is known as the selection threshold. Consequently, these slightly harmful mutations are accumulating in the genome at a steady rate. With every generation, the average couple passes on roughly 100 additional mutations to their children. It is because of these slightly harmful mutations that mankind is undergoing genetic degeneration. In fact, there is strong evidence that we are not evolving, but rather devolving.
Wow.
Although natural selection can slow genetic degeneration,
this, guys, like, this is bizarre. Okay, we've moved very quickly from, obviously this has been propaganda the whole time, but this is so wild. This goes back to that idea of entropy that we saw very, very early in the beginning when we were looking at kind of the background information of the documentary. Yeah, I guess, like, there's, nothing about, any of the increased, pollution that's going on, or any of the increased, lack of nutrition that people are having and stuff like that might be impacting things like disease. It's just very strange.
Cannot stop it.
The reason selection fails is mutations are coming into the population faster than they can be selected away, and because most mutations, especially beneficial mutations, are too subtle. That is, their impact is invisible to natural selection.
Genetic entropy is increasingly being recognized as a very serious problem for the modern theory of evolution. From the 1950s to the present, the apparent certainty of genetic degeneration of man has been repeatedly acknowledged by leading population geneticists, some of whom played a central role in the development of the modern theory of evolution. Contemporary population geneticist Alexei Kondrashov titled his paper published in the Journal of Theoretical Biology, "Contamination of the Genome by Very Slightly Deleterious Mutations. Why Have We Not Died 100 Times Over?" To date, the problem of genetic degeneration remains unresolved, despite numerous attempts by leaders in the field to rescue the theory.
The evidence from modern genetics demonstrates that the observable changes in animals are going in the wrong direction informationally to lead to large-scale evolution.
Yeah, this is just lie after lie after lie.
While species certainly have the ability to adapt, the extent of change is limited based on the available genetic information. Rather than one kind of creature evolving into a totally new kind through random mutations and natural selection, the Genesis account reveals that in the beginning, God created distinct kinds of plants and animals, each to reproduce according to their kind.
Okay, this is the Christian perspective plug here. I think this is maybe one of the first we've got.
Chapter in Genesis reads, "Then God said, Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Genesis 1:20-25. If what the biblical view of biology suggests is true, that each basic kind of life arose independently, then Darwin's vision of a single tree of life with its root tracing back to a primordial bacterium would have to be replaced with a forest of trees, reflecting an independent origin for each form of life, each tree branching out into its own diverse set of species, and each tree having built-in genetic diversity, allowing for the formation of numerous variations.
Wow, well, let's try to see if we can look at that again. Hold on.
Having built-in genetic diversity.
Guys, like, this is so bizarre. It shows, you know, I guess turtle kind, whale kind, bunny kind. And then here's this a wolf. Like, what's the difference between these things? What about the fact that kind of, you know, the morphology of these, you know, the mammals, you're going to find similarities between them. None of that matters, I guess. Guys, essentially, what it really looks like is they took a massive phylogenetic tree of evolution and like chopped it off halfway, and then we're like, okay, just started here. Bizarre.
Allowing for the formation of numerous variations, branches, within those basic kinds, thus enabling their descendants to survive and adapt to a wide variety of environments. This, however, is not macroevolution, since it does not involve the formation of any new functional DNA sequences. It is simply the fragmentation of each created.
Wow. They keep, once again, guys, this is moving the goalpost. Evolution is speciation. Well, not is speciation, but macroevolution is kind of speciation. That's when we really see that occurring. Goodness gracious. Like I said, we're having some... Let's try this guy for now, just because we're having so many issues with video. One second, guys.
Kind into beautiful and diverse variant species through the sorting, selection, and reshuffling of already existing genetic information, just as the biblical view of biology suggests.
Since the time of Darwin, many determined individuals have searched for missing links between ape and man. Periodically, fragmentary skeletons have searched for links between ape and man.
Oh.
Periodically, fragmentary searched for links between ape and man. Periodically, fragmentary searched for links between ape and man. Periodically, fragmentary searched for links between ape and man. Periodically, fragmentary searched for links between ape and man.
We're going to pretend like that didn't happen. Let's just pretend that didn't occur at all. Sorry about that, guys.
Have been found, and artists' reconstructions of their bones are presented to the public as undeniable evidence that man evolved from ape-like creatures. To scientists who study their bones, these alleged transitional forms are called hominins.
A family tree or bush is often used to represent how hominins are thought to be related. Most of the hominin species are understood by...
One thing here that's very interesting is this documentary is almost essentially saying that humans definitely had ancestors and humans definitely evolved, but they can't say it directly. And they're going to, I guess, somehow prove that maybe the other hominins don't count. I'm not sure how they're going to do this. Let's see.
Experts in the field to be evolutionary dead ends. Apes or variants of humans that went extinct, shown as broken side branches. Paleoanthropologists generally recognize only a few hominin species in the direct human lineage. Among them are some of the most well-known discoveries, such as the famous Lucy skeleton. If human evolution is a valid theory, the hominin fossil should fall along a traceable path, starting with an early ape-like species such as Lucy into some form of Homo habilis intermediate, then into the human-looking Homo erectus and Neanderthal type, and finally into modern Homo sapiens. What you may not realize is that there are leading experts in the field that contest the status of each of these alleged hominin ancestors. Let's take a look at what we know.
I guess that they take the word leading expert very loosely.
About these hominins. Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. Lucy is the nickname given to a partial fossil skeleton discovered in 1974 in the Afar region of Ethiopia by paleoanthropologist Donald Johansen. The bones of Lucy are believed to represent a single individual skeleton. Johansen claimed that Lucy belonged to an extinct population of ape-like creatures that once roamed Africa between 3 to 4 million years ago. The species Lucy is said to represent was named by Johansen as Australopithecus afarensis, meaning southern ape from Afar. To date, over 400 specimens have been attributed to Lucy's kind, afarensis, but nearly all of those consist of isolated bones or bone fragments that were found eroding out of the...
Interesting. So, okay. So afarensis is like, what is it, genus? Because we're in genus Homo, they would be in genus, the Australopiths. So I guess if this is saying that kind is on the genus level, which is interesting because the word kind keeps changing over and over and over again, or where the kind line is keeps changing over and over again.
The hillsides, jumbled together with the fossils of all kinds of African species. With only 20% of Lucy's skeleton preserved, it remains one of the most complete afarensis skeletons discovered. However, the bones attributed to Lucy and her kind were found disconnected and broadly scattered across the Afar landscape.
Johansen claims that Lucy is 40% complete. Well, actually, if you count the missing bones of the hands and feet, it's actually only 20% complete. So much of it is missing. Moreover, they had to sift 20 tons of...
They basically are going to say reasons why Lucy is just not good enough, right? And we have Lucy is a pretty well, to my understanding, is a pretty good specimen. There are other ones that are far worse than her, like I guess far less complete. It's just interesting that they picked on her.
Of sediment. So they would screen them and get rid of all the loose sediment, and they would wash it by the river, and they would pick out the bones that Johansen said may belong to Lucy's skeleton. And there were hundreds of fragments. So they had to sift not only just 20 tons of sediment, but it was an area of about 50 square meters. So do all those bones belong to Lucy's skeleton? It's an open question. In 2015, an evolutionary scientific journal showed that actually one of the vertebrae bones belongs to the baboon. But for 40 years, it went unnoticed. And Lucy was reconstructed in museums with that bone as a part of the skeleton all around the world. So do we really know for sure if Lucy's skeleton and the broader kind belong to the same species? Well, I don't think we should trust that, because even today, numerous experts in the field have written extensively in the scientific literature that afarensis appears to be a commixture of ape bones and human bones. It's not a single species. It's not a valid taxon, according to the...
Which is crazy because ape bones and human bones, that's like saying golden retriever bones and dog bones. Very similar things that we're dealing with here. This is pretty much, yeah.
These evolutionary.
Essentially saying that, yeah, these findings are not cool, not good enough, and they don't count. Therefore, Lucy is just is a fraud. And that's why I say so often, guys, this is why this is so fucked up, is because they lie directly. I guess they don't feel like they're lying, right? They're just stretching the truth and kind of creating this narrative from basically poking holes in the evolution narrative.
Paleoanthropologists.
It is widely acknowledged that the fossils attributed to afarensis display a substantial range of variation in both size and anatomy, leading many paleo experts to question whether all of the remains belong to the same species. In fact, Johansen originally reported in the journal Nature that at least 2 different species from separate genera were represented in his collection of bones. He described some of his fossils as looking virtually identical to modern humans, while other fossils he described as looking distinctly like apes. Later, Johansen decided to reclassify all of his fossils, including the human-looking bones, to a single new species, which he named Australopithecus afarensis. The extensive range of variation seen in his fossils were now explained as physical differences between males and females of the same species, called sexual dimorphism. To make the story work, paleoanthropologists have claimed that the larger human-looking bones belong to...
So this is very interesting because this is essentially saying that they have constructed this false narrative from the evidence, which is I guess a really great way to kind of poison the well here.
Males that walked upright like modern humans, whereas the smaller ape-looking bones belonged to females that lived in the trees. However, experts in the field have taken issue with Johansen's sexual dimorphism hypothesis and have cited evidence that his original interpretation was more accurate, that afarensis is a jumble of ape and human bones.
There's two basic camps. There's the arborealists and the terrestrialists. The arborealists tend to emphasize the bones that have been called Lucy's kind that looked very apish. Now, the terrestrialists, like Johansen, they'll emphasize the isolated bones that look more human. For example, they found a fourth metatarsal bone. This was published in journals in 2011. And they say, see, this isolated foot bone looks human. Therefore, it proves our model that Lucy's kind actually walked upright like modern humans, and therefore it supports the displays we see in museums and in textbooks around the world. To make sense of it, they say, well, maybe the larger bones that look more human-like belong to males. And the males walked habitually upright like modern humans, and the smaller ape-looking bones belong to females.
And the other thing here, guys, is these bones could have looked human-like because they probably do look human-like, but they also probably looked distinctly not human, which is why we would not classify them as Homo sapien bones or genus Homo bones. There could have been enough differences, right? For me, right, the normal layperson, I could look at that and not even be able to tell the difference. It takes a very well-trained eye to be able to see the differences here.
So these females were more like apes and lived among the trees. We've never seen a sexual dimorphism where the males locomote fundamentally different than the females. So how do we make sense of this? Well, there's a third competing view that actually Lucy's kind is a mixture of ape bones and human bones. Therefore, it's not a valid taxon. It's not a real species. And this has actually been promoted by numerous experts in the field, including famous paleo expert Richard Leakey and his mother, Mary Leakey. In fact, even in the journal Human Evolution, Schmidt and Hausler, leading experts in the field, said just that. Afarensis, Lucy's kind, is a jumble of multiple species, not our ancestors.
I just want to look up Richard Leakey. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I've just never heard of this person before. Okay, let's continue.
In 1976, footprints fossilized in ash were found in Laetoli, Tanzania, by British paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey, and were dated to be 3.7 million years old. Researchers described the Laetoli footprints as looking virtually identical to those made by humans. The fossilized footprints lack a fundamental characteristic of all living apes, a grasping big toe. In describing her own discovery, Mary Leakey acknowledged that they don't look any different from modern human footprints, an observation that is widely acknowledged by experts in the field.
Wait. It says the essentially human nature and modern appearance was extraordinary. I guess saying essentially human nature doesn't mean that it looks exactly the same as a human.
An observation that is widely
very clever word manipulation here, guys.
Acknowledged by experts in the field. This, however, presents a fundamental challenge for evolutionary scientists, since modern humans are not supposed to have existed 3.7 million years ago. Such a finding would effectively falsify the ape-to-man theory.
No, it wouldn't. It would just help us restructure our understanding of the evidence that we had. Such a sneaky way.
To resolve this conflict, Johansen and colleagues claimed that Lucy's kind formed the human-looking footprints in Laetoli, even though the footprints were found 1,000 miles away from where Lucy was discovered in Hadar and dated over 500,000 years older. The actual skeletal remains of Lucy could not substantiate their claim either, because the critical bones of the feet were missing. Soon after the discovery of Lucy, a large collection of fossils recovered at a separate site in Hadar cast more doubt on these claims. The sample included a number of hand and foot bones, including a partial foot skeleton that was assigned to Lucy's species Afarensis. In the American Journal of Physical Anthropology, evolutionary anatomists Jack Stern and Randall Sussman performed a comprehensive analysis of the hand and foot bones. It was clear to these researchers that the Hadar hands and feet were strikingly similar to living African apes. They concluded there is no evidence that any living primate has long curved, heavy-muscled hands and feet for any purpose other than to meet the demands of full or part-time tree-dwelling life. This has left evolutionists with a dilemma, which Scientific American has described as the world's oldest whodunit. an unsolved mystery.
Okay, and we've lost our video again. We're gonna finish out and wrap up this segment in just 1 second.
If Lucy's kind cannot be credited with forming the human-looking Laetoli footprints, then who or what did? In an attempt to solve this mystery, former researcher of the Laetoli footprints, Russell Tuttle, suggests a far-fetched idea.
Tuttle writes in Natural History, in any case, we should shelve the loose assumption that the Laetoli footprints were made by Lucy's kind, Australopithecus afarensis.
So let's just pause here for right now. Thank you so much for hanging out with me over there. We'll come back, hopefully, and finish this documentary up next week.